Having finished a book about love and beginning the exploration to explore a book about loneliness, I'm struck by the question where to begin. In an emotionally illiterate culture, we know very little in any scientific sense about anything. And in a shadow-avoidant culture, we know very little about the darker sides. In other words, there's more talk about love than there is about loneliness. In many ways, loneliness is taboo. It has been culturally shamed. And so it compounds the loneliness of not even knowing what it means or being able to talk about it. So my first stop was to look at quotes on loneliness and also to buy a number of Audible books on loneliness. And sorting through those quotes, here are a couple that begin a conversation. So let's look at each one. Remember, the time you feel lonely is the time you most need to be by yourself. Life's cruelest irony. So, what I think about with this quote is that the loneliest we can be is when we have lost ourselves and are looking for ourselves in others who are not there. When we look for ourselves with others who are deeply present, empathic, and responsive, we may find ourselves in the dance with an empathic other. But when trying to look for ourselves after we have rejected ourselves and hunting for it in a group that does not accept who we are, we have rejection on all sides. Because after all, we are not lonely if we're deeply in love with ourselves, when we're deeply in tune with ourselves. We are lonely when we want nothing to do with ourselves. And so we go looking for somebody else who wants something to do with us. And we don't find it, in part because if we want nothing to do with ourselves, then in order to secure love, in order to secure validation from another, we have to act. Because the supposition of saying, I want nothing to do with myself, is that who I am is unlovable. And if I am is unlovable, and I'm trying to get love from somebody else, the only feasible option is performance. Now, if we put on a good act and are clapped and appreciated and paid well or whatever, we're still lonely because we've just verified that the only thing that can be paid well and loved by another is not who we are, it's a performance. So who we are feels lonely. If the performance is not received well, and we've already rejected who we are, and now we've gone out and put on a performance, and people didn't like the performance, judged the performance negatively, well, then there's hopelessness and despair, because we already know that we're unlovable, because we cannot imagine in the narcissism of an emotionally immature culture, we cannot imagine that somebody else or someone else or something else bigger than us could love us more than we love ourselves. We project our inability and unwillingness to love ourselves onto others. We then take our projection as fact. We then put on a show, put on a pretense, hope they don't find out that that's not who we really are. And whether they accept the show or reject the show, it's a show. And so it does not answer the need to be seen, to be understood, to be loved where we are. Now, the movement away from the group to ourselves is a statement of faith. What we're saying is there might be something there that's worth loving. There might be someone there that's worth spending time with. And we're saying that in a language that's much more powerful than words. We're saying it by doing it. In other words, when we get alone to check in with where we are, that is a prayer based on the faith that there's someone worthwhile to get to know. And so much of psychology is based on belief, meaning belief is such a strong matrix that it blocks out the data that disagrees with it. And in a polarizing reality, there is data that says we're lovable, and there's data that says we're unlovable. The belief that we are unlovable blocks out all the data that says we are lovable. And the belief that we are lovable blocks out all the data that says we're unlovable. And so what we experience looking at reality, organizing reality through the filters of our belief, is the data that can permeate that filter. And this grid, the only thing that can get through is I'm lovable. And this grid, the only thing that can get through is I'm not lovable. It begins with an assumption, a supposition, a belief. And the choice to be alone, the choice to connect with ourself, begins with the belief that there's something and someone valuable to connect with. Once we have built and established a connection with ourself, once we have honored, respected, and loved that self, we can then bring that self, knowing it is lovable because we are loving it. To love is to love enough to care enough to take time, to take enough time to see clearly enough to understand enough to empathize enough to change, to respond, to attune enough to succeed at facilitating the survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, discovery and development of talent, bringing abundance into our own and other people's lives with that talent, and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves. That is the human need that every human in history has had in that hierarchy of needs that Abraham Maslow developed as a model, as a belief set for understanding people. And when we do that to ourselves, beginning with taking enough time, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand, when we care about ourselves, we know we are lovable because we love ourselves. We also understand that other people have better and worse ability to love than we do. So some people can love us better than we can love ourselves because they have a greater capacity to love. And other people can love us worse than we love ourselves because they have a poor capacity to love. And we understand that. But when we have loved ourselves, which begins alone, then there may be empathy for people who cannot love us, because when people cannot love us, we are part of the human possibility field. We are part of the human probability field. We are part of the human actual field. We are in the density of the human expression. And every human being has within them the entire possibility field of the species. It is possible for any human being to become any other human being. If it wasn't, there would be no other human being like that. It is possible for the psyche to see this, and it is possible for the psyche to see that. It is possible to adopt this belief, it is possible to adopt that belief. Now, when we cannot love ourselves, it means we lack the capacity. We need love, we want love, we lack the capacity. And so we are alone. We block out the love of everything around us. The earth is constantly loving us with breath, with light, with heat. We are being loved on so many dimensions, in so many different ways, that the only thing that can block out a lot of that data is beliefs, I'm not worthy of love. Well, if I'm not worthy of love, then I will not be loved in a sane world. If I will not be loved and I cannot be loved, that belief will block out the data of love, so I feel alone. Now, the belief that I love myself, but I'm not worthy of love doesn't fit very well. So if the stronger belief is I'm not worthy of love, then we will not love ourselves. But on the other hand, if we start to love ourselves, we will say, well, I must be lovable because this is what I'm doing. We're always seeking sanity. And so a lot of that in a psychologically illiterate, emotionally illiterate culture, the odds that we can learn to love ourselves are higher, statistically speaking, than that some random group of people who have never been taught to love are going to be able to love us better than ourselves. And particularly in a superficial culture, meaning in a culture where all deep feelings are avoided as taboo. When the biggest crime within the cult is to express and act on deep feelings, we're not going to even find the topic of love and lovability. We're not going to be dealing with the real issues in 90% of the cultural environments that are perpetuated, that are created, not to explore depth and it becomes psychologically illiterate. They're created to sustain the cult identity, which happens to be chauvinistic, emotionally and psychologically illiterate, traumatically illiterate, and afraid of the feminine and afraid of depth. The worst part of holding the memories is not the pain, it's the loneliness of it. Memories need to be shared. So one of the aspects, one of the faces of loneliness is separation. When we are separate from others, when we are separate from ourselves, when we are separate from our planet, when we cannot see our interconnectivity, it's important to understand that in many ways that is an illusion. Meaning a scientist will show you ways that you are inextricably connected to all things. I mean, just take the decision forking tree of the Big Bang. Every single thing in existence has the same ancestry. We were all bedfellows in something less than the size of a pea only 25 or 30 billion years ago. Every single human on the planet has the same ancestry. We're all in the same solar system. We're all made of light and matter, energy and waves. We're all subject to the lines of gravity. We're all human. The trees are giving us life-affirming oxygen every second. The waters are giving us liquid. We are connected And our existence is supported as of now. If we are here, 1,000 things had to go right for this to exist. The sun has to keep burning its nuclear reactions every single moment, or you and I are not blessed with existence. And so it takes quite an effort. It takes a lot of programming, of reinforced blockades and beliefs in order to feel that we don't deserve to be connected. A lot of that comes with the child's innate drive to seek union, to seek attachment with the parent, and the parent's terror of the depth of feeling that comes when connecting with innocence, and need to push that away and manage their own dynamics in a dysfunctional culture. So we will, if we are separate, if we're not sharing our experiences, if we're pretending that we're isolated, it's based on beliefs of scarcity, it's based on misinformation that takes us away from who we are. When pain is shared, it is like taking a 100-pound sack and carrying the load. Now, there's an interesting phenomena about this, which is that we all think that our pain is real. You know, my mom did this and it was horrible, and my father did that, what a jerk, and my older sibling did that. My teachers, they were so unfair and, corrupt, and you should have seen what the government did in this administration and that administration. They ruined that person's life, and this and that. And it's all about me, and it's horrible. It's heavy to carry, and I'm not sure I can carry it. Now, somebody else looks at that, and it's not their stuff, so it has no weight. Your mom hit you. Lots of people get hit, right? So when you share your story, you divide the load of your story, your pain, your charge around it. You divide it by the amount of people who empathically receive it. And if you have the full attention and empathy of 7 people and you were carrying 150 pounds and, my God, I can't carry it anymore, all these stairs I'm going up. You take 20 pounds and 20 pounds and 20 pounds and 20 pounds and 20 pounds. Now you've got 20 pounds and everyone's holding 20%. They get it. They understand. They care about you. They say, oh, that sounds really bad. The truth is that none of them, they're carrying it, but they don't believe it as much as you do. They don't think it is as important as their burdens, right? So when you share all your stuff with a group of 5 or 7 people, they can carry it. Not only that, if you have empathy and support from 5 to 7 people, and they care enough to listen and understand and be responsive, you can probably overcome the ordeal you're dealing with if you have the support and empathy of 7 people. You may not be able to deal with it alone. I just can't deal with it. I've got 150 pounds, then I've got to do this by myself, I've got to do that, this could go wrong. I can't deal with it. 7 people probably can deal with your life problems. Now here's the beauty. All of your pain and your problems is tremendously real and unmovable and heavy, and it means all these things to you, and it's locked into your body with all those body memories, and it's real. It's really, really real. But it's not that real to your therapist. It's not that real to those friends. It's what happens, and I'm here for you, but they weren't living that. It's not in their body. So they're carrying 20% of the weight, but it's not that heavy to them to carry. And this is really important because the same is true in reverse. This is why 2 friends sharing their problems lifts things for both people. Because I give you half of my weight and you only experience it at 10% on the dollar. right? I give you 75 pounds, but it only feels like about 15 pounds to you because it's not that real to you. So you're not totally lost in the maze. And so you're a little bit more free. And you can see the way out of it, the way I can't, because when I was 5 years old and 3 years old, I couldn't see anything. But you can see that I'm not 5 years old again. I can't. I'm regressed. But you're not. And so you can begin showing me the way. And suddenly I find, I'm not going to die. It's wonderful. Now tell me about your problems. And you tell me your problems. It's like, those aren't real problems. That's easy. You just do this. Just leave. Just do this. And there's no problem. Because you give me 75 pounds of your 150 pounds that you experience. It only weighs 5 pounds to me. It's like, that's easy. I do that all the time because we're different, because it's not real to us. So if 7 people share, each carrying 150 pounds, and they all share their stuff and they all work together, their confidence in dealing with it goes up, and the net weight that is experienced is reduced by at least half. That's pretty powerful. And the other thing that is important to understand is, for example, my loneliness went down reading these quotes because I realize I'm not separate, which leads to the realization or the challenge to the belief that I deserve to be alone, that there's something unlovable about me. Because if you look at these wonderful people and all their accomplishments and stuff, you can't say, what? These people are all unlovable? Maybe it's good to hang out with the unlovable people since they're such interesting and creative and contributing human beings. Maybe unlovable people are amazing friends to have, right? And so then I'm an amazing friend to have, right? So what you're doing is you're reestablishing a link, which is undermining the message communicating by abusive parents and cultural elements that we're unworthy of being connected, that we're cast out. Because that's also the mythology. God's a tyrannical bully, and if you don't do what he says, when he says it, without question, you'll be cast out, never to return. And you'll die and you'll be tortured and burned alive by a sociopath. Well, that's pretty, what must I have done to be worthy of that, right? Well, you did all these sins. You did all these sins. And it's a long, slow road back to salvation. If you do this, and you give all this money to the church and all this, you might get through, but you might not. You could be right there at the gate and God lets all his children except you, the black sheep, right? You get thrown out into a pit of fire. God's loving, but, you didn't do exactly what he said when he said it. God's a reptile. God's a sociopath. He's dealing with the reptilian program of fight, flight, and freeze. He's going to punish you for eternity, burning you alive. This is terrifying, right? So when you reestablish whatever it is that's taboo, whatever it is that's been cast out, your mother didn't want to hear how angry you were or how depressed you were about this and that and the other. So now when somebody hears that, you realize it must be lovable because someone who is not at all perfect is loving it. So then you just realize, my mother at that time, at that stage in her development, did not have the ability or willingness to love this part of me. She's human, she's imperfect, maybe she's changed, maybe she hasn't, but there's plenty of other people who have loved that. And if a human can understand you and love you, it's a little bit irrational to pretend that God would lack that ability, or the goddess, right? That God is all it is and all the possibility existent. No one is more evolved out there than the one random human you ran into who's able to listen and love you and hear what you have to say. Nobody likes being alone that much. I don't go out of my way to make friends, that's all. It just leads to disappointment. And this is absolutely correct. Meaning we all want love and belonging. We all need love and belonging. But we are raised in a cult that institutionalizes emotional illiteracy. Now, how do you institutionalize emotional illiteracy? And love being an emotion, it's pretty hard to love well if you're illiterate to the extent that you don't even know what it is, let alone how to do it, and let alone do it well. But we all need to be loved well. Love and belonging is number 3 in our hierarchy of needs. It is a basic need. We all need to be loved. We are a pack mammalian social species. And love is saying you belong. We're going to look out for you. We need that for even survival and security. You put an infant on an island without any people, let alone competent, loving people, and that infant will die. We need one another. We need one another's goodwill, and we fear death without it. So we need it desperately. We're looking for people who can love us well. Why? Because we don't know how. Why? Because we've been raised in the same psychologically illiterate cult. So what do? We look out. Do you know how to love me? Do you know how to love me? And in a psychologically illiterate cult, not only do we not know how to love, but when people express their need for love, they're punished because it reveals the inadequacy of the cult. And a cult will do just about anything other than admit that it doesn't know what it's doing. Now, our cult doesn't know what it's doing, but it is taboo to say that. Our parents don't know what they're doing, but it is taboo to say that. We don't know what we're doing, but it is uncomfortable to say that, right? So it just leads to disappointment, meaning when you try to form friendships with people that don't know how to be good friends to themselves, and thus don't know how to be friends to you, it is massively disappointing. And it takes a lot of energy to try and find someone who has some glimmering potential of being a decent friend, and then they don't do it very well because they weren't taught. So to complete that thought on institutionalization, you can be a parent without any parental training. You can be in kindergarten without any emotional training. You're trained to shame yourself and that you're something wrong with you. If you listen to Christian mythology, you're taught that you're originally a sinner, that you're such a bad person that if you don't do all these little things, this in the way, and all these things, that you'll be burned alive at the stake. These are not worthy messages. Your parents react to each other's intense feelings in anything but a loving way. Nobody seems to know what they're doing in marriage and relationship, and you learn from them. You go to kindergarten and school, you learn nothing about your feelings that's of any use at all. You don't get a single competent hour. Then you're told to leave home. No emotional literacy there. Taught to get a job where the professional definition, the definition of being a professional, is someone who leaves their feelings at home. Except how could they leave their feelings at home when nobody's able to love them at home either, right? So where are they leaving them? It's basically a cult designed to shame and push away all feelings. So you retire and what? You learn, or you start having sex with people and you learn about love, or do you learn about shame and abuse and rejection and insanity, right? So one can be born in a hospital and learn zero about feelings. One can go and be parented or try to be a parent and learn nothing about feelings. And one can go to church and basically learn that you're a horrible person and, you're such a horrible person, don't look inside. But if you do everything that we tell you to do and give 10% of your money, then Even though you're a horrible person, God will still let you come by his side and you won't be cast out, right? And then you can go to college, no emotional literacy. You can do everything the cult has designed for you, train for work, and learn nothing about your psyche, about the science of feelings. So that's institutionalized psychological illiteracy. So when you are in a shame culture and a punishment culture, you have scarcity because all shame and punishment is a symptom of incompetence. If you're highly competent, you're highly loved and loving. We need that. When there isn't love and lovingness, there's scarcity and there's pain. And when there's pain, in an incompetent culture, someone needs to be punished and blamed for the pain. And their behavior and feelings need to be shamed. And they need to be thrown out of the garden, thrown out of the family, turned into the black sheep, the black goat, the scapegoat. Well, that's an incompetent cult. So how are you going to find these competent, loving friends in a psychologically incompetent cult that teaches secrecy and shame over transparency and vulnerability, that punishes vulnerability as weakness? So it does lead to disappointment in our cult, and it will lead to disappointment, meaning you and I will continue to be disappointing to others, and they will continue to be disappointing to us until we create a microculture of competency, a microculture of competent friendship. Music was my refuge. I could crawl into the space between the notes and curl my back to loneliness. And we all need a cocoon to survive the intensity, the raw intensity of rage, of hatred, of pain, of ignorance, of questioning that is born out of a chauvinistic, psychologically, emotionally, traumatically illiterate cult. This is a long quote, so we'll go through it piece by piece. It's somewhat of an antidote to loneliness, but was in there, and I think it speaks in many ways to a level of friendship that I've never met a friend who responded this way to me. And I've had thousands of interactions with people, often on a growth path in different countries, et cetera. And so I thought this was a good counterbalance, right? I doubt that Haruki would be disappointed if he was loved by this friend. I'm here. I love you. I don't care if you need to stay up crying all night long. I will stay with you. If you need the medication again, go ahead and take it. I will love you through that as well. If you don't need the medication, I will love you too. There's nothing you can ever do to lose my love. I will protect you until you die. And after your death, I will still protect you. I am stronger than depression, and I am braver than loneliness. And nothing will ever exhaust me. Well, if we had parents with that sentiment, with that skill, with the ability to carry through with that, if we had friends like that, 90% of the loneliness in the world would evaporate, because we're talking about competency here. We're talking about transcending fear and shame, to talk about deep feelings And so it's found in the artist community, in this case, a writer. It's found in a woman, in someone who's not afraid of her femininity. Well, I'm terrified of my femininity because it has been bullied and shamed and beaten and has been starved of so much validation that it's believed the lie that there's something wrong with it. And so it takes powerful people willing to throw the cult by the wayside and own their authentic truth. It takes that in a lonely cult to heal loneliness. All I ever wanted was to reach out and touch another human being, not just with my hands, but with my heart. Well, as social mammalian species, we find ourself in relationship with the other. We find our identity in relationship with the cult. The culture is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And it has a possibility field and a probability field. And as we interact with parts of that possibility field and that probability field, we find our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in response to the cult. To love another emotionally and physically is to find the loving identity within ourselves. It's difficult. It's more difficult to find that without another. And so we yearn to find the one in us that is capable of loving. And so we yearn to find the other that is capable of being loved. To be capable of being loved is to not attack that love, to not shame and use and abuse the person who's loving you. If you attack and exploit and irritate and wear anyone down who tries to love you, you're not lovable in a technical sense. And we yearn to find someone who is lovable, who will not punish us in some way by elevating our pain as a result of loving them. We yearn. And we feel lonely when we are separate from the most beautiful parts of ourself. We feel lonely. I want to know the one inside me who loves, who has courage, who is bold, who is beautiful, who's creative. And they're a long way away. I'm here afraid of being hit, afraid of being lied to, afraid of being hurt and humiliated for my feelings. I want to find the one I can love. If you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company. Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, this is, I think, a good medicine or a good awareness for those of us who think it's all the other person's fault, right? Why doesn't this person love me? Why doesn't that person love me, right? If we spend 10 days in silence, sitting and meditating and reflecting on our thoughts, and we don't want to be there, it's like, please get me out of here. But we want this person to be there, and this person to be there, and this person to be there, and this person. If you can't stand yourself for a couple of days, then why should someone else put up with you for a lifetime, right? So it's a good awareness of that. But it's also important, because we're thick into the blame and shame game as a way of protecting the cult, to understand that bad company doesn't emerge out of nowhere. Meaning you may, statistically, be a terrible lover be a terrible friend to yourself and others, be highly incompetent, very unhappy, and doing a great deal of ecological damage to your host body, functioning largely as a cancer. Statistically, there's a lot of that going around. The individual identity, pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is hereditary. It's ecological. The individual is not born out of nowhere. The individual identity, pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being doesn't come out of nowhere. We learn the language of the cult. Our thoughts are framed by that language. You can't think a single thought without words. The paradigms are emphasized and de-emphasized. The chauvinism is default mode. So if you're in bad company, you're in a bad cult that raises bad company. That doesn't help you accept if the cult tries to shame and blame you. What's wrong with you, says the cult. Nothing before I was born into this cult. I was hanging around in innocence and beauty. It took this and this and this and 10,000 other things before I became as fucked up as you think I am. The question is, since we dish out this amount of stupidity to one generation after the next, where's the cult owning up to its ability and willingness to respond? You see, and unfortunately, in dysfunctional cults, the cult can't change, doesn't know how to love. So it would be responsible for the cult to say, you would have turned out just fine if we hadn't put you in this neighborhood, if we hadn't eliminated all emotional education, if we hadn't shamed you, if we hadn't taught you that you're worthless because your boobs aren't a certain size, if we hadn't done 10,000 things to fuck you up and screw you around, you would be just fine. It's not your fault. It's just the same kind of cult that is dumb enough to do all of those things repetitively, knowing the outcome. Meaning we have more people committing suicide in our cult than die in car accidents in a cult that is in love with cars. Driving around at 100 miles an hour, passing each other within feet. More people die of suicide. We are a cult that creates massive amounts of pain and then shames people for talking about it to such a degree that they don't talk about it, the load gets too heavy, and they'd rather die than live another day in this cult. Sound like a great cult? The only problem is a cult that is so dumb that it can do that to its own people is too dumb to apologize, is too dumb to say, you're right, you were fine until you were born here. You're right, as long as we produce alcohol and ban psychedelics, as long as we tell men that the only emotions they're allowed to have is anger, as long as we tell men that they're bad people because that we're going to create problems. And you're one of the statistical fallouts of those problems. But if we're dumb enough to do all that, we're not smart enough to apologize or figure out what to do about it, right? So you are in bad company if you don't like being alone. And your company is your identity. That's what's bad. Your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is driving you nuts. You learned all of that from your cult. The identity is hereditary, and maybe you made a few changes, probably for the better. In terms of evolution, statistically, each generation gets a little better. So you were given a pattern that was even worse. Your parents were bad company. Your cult was bad company. Your school was bad company. And now you've been infected with the virus of identity. And you think that's you. But it's just your identity. And if it's bad company, work on changing the company, change the identity, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. But don't blame and shame yourself as if this identity just came out of nowhere. Identities are viral. You caught it from someone, from some place, from your cult. I have absolutely no pleasure in the stimulants in which I sometimes so madly indulge. It has not been in the pursuit of pleasure that I have periled life and reputation and reason. It has been the desperate attempt to escape from torturing memories, traumatic memories, which do not get dealt with in a traumatically illiterate cult. From a sense of unsupportable loneliness and a dread of some strange, impending doom. Well, Edgar Allan Poe obviously was brilliant at creating horror stories, and we reward that, right? We look at, how to turn his terror into an economic engine in a capitalist cult. It's all about how much money you can make for other people. And you are valuable and important if you can make a lot of money for other people. And if you can't, well, you're just a crybaby, right? So Edgar Allan Poe turned this into millions of dollars and, became famous and all of that. But what he's saying is that nowhere in all those millions or fame or any of that was he able to overcome his traumatic memories, because he was born in the generation of shame for helplessness, for dread, for these very feelings. In other words, one of his greatest acts of courage is to share the truth, that no amount of drugs or anything could really be about or give him much pleasure. They simply helped him not be alone in horrific, traumatic memories that many of us share. The vast majority of us have locked in our bodies in a cult that won't deal with them. When I get lonely these days, I think, so be lonely, Liz. Learn your way around loneliness. So we're talking about emotional literacy. Make a map of it, emotional literacy. Sit with it for once in your life. Many of us have never sat with loneliness once in our entire life. For many Americans, if they watched this video, this would have been the only analytical exploration of loneliness and its dynamics in an entire lifetime, in an entire country filled with lonely people. That's a pretty high level of willful ignorance. Welcome to the human experience. Certainly welcome to the American experience. But never again use another person's body or emotions as a scratching post for your own unfulfilled yearnings. Well, I think it is important to understand that much of what we call love is addictive need. I don't want to feel this way. You are a buffer, you're a block. I need you to help me avoid my feelings. And Liz is making a commitment to herself to not use other people to manage her feelings. Well, obviously becoming emotionally literate is a good part of that, is to sit with it, to learn with it, to realize that these are just feelings, that they are responses to beliefs and patterns that are individual, they're also collective. Meaning if we didn't believe we were so shameful collectively, it wouldn't be so hard to reach out to a neighbor and have a cuddle buddy, Hey, any cuddle buddies in the neighborhood? I'm kind of feeling a little bit unworthy at 3 a.m. And there's probably another neighbor feeling that way. But in a shame-based cult, if you put that out on a text in the neighborhood, everyone attacks the anomaly, the one who's breaking the cult taboo by admitting they have needs. Hello, just try covering your nose and mouth for an hour or two. Stop eating for a few years. No liquid, 5 or 6 days. We have needs. There's nothing wrong with them. The only thing that's wrong is a cult that refuses to meet the need and to cover its own incompetence punishes the people who speak about the need. We have an epidemic of growing needs because we have a cult that's incapable of responding to it. Now, we do have the ability to love ourselves. Sometimes we can learn that better alone and practice it alone, and if Liz can do that, more power to her. It's also true that a tremendous amount of what's called romantic relationship is simply two people using each other for their own fear and pain abatement. Meaning, you make me look good, so I want you, and I don't really care if I make you happy or not. I want you to stay because I need you to make me look good. And I'll do this for you if you do this for me. And, it's very transactional as a way to respond to the cult's needs. I'm a woman, I feel unsafe, I want a strong man who will protect me as long as he can fuck me whenever he wants to. These contracts are certainly not peak states of empathy and love. They're survival, security-based, often highly dysfunctional contracts. And, I feel lonely, so I'll have sex with you, or I feel lonely, so you have to have sex with me, or I'll pay you money not to leave me. They're not very high resonance contracts for the most part. I think the key thing is to be honest myself. I feel terribly lonely sometimes, and my wife helps me to feel less lonely. Meaning I go to my wife, I say, I feel terribly lonely, and I'd like to hold you. And thank goodness she says yes. Some of the reason she may say yes is because I'd probably find somebody else if that had no interest in her. Meaning, I'm managing and dealing with feelings that feel very heavy, that I have very little knowledge about, that overwhelm my body to a point where sometimes it's hard to move, and so I definitely feel like a 2-year-old needing help. Now, I don't think it's fair to do that if it's not also good for the other person. So my movement around this is not to void all contracts. These are called emotional or psychic contracts or relational contracts. I don't have a problem with win-win contracts. You're going to do this for me, or I won't do this for you, and I'm going to do this for you, and you won't do this for me and stuff. There's a place for that. I'm not going to do a major construction project for one of my clients if they don't agree to pay for it. And I'm not going to agree to make a partner the primary focus of my life and be faithful and do this and do that and do all these other things if they're not going to show up in an area that's useful for my well-being. Meaning there's a transactional element. I've never met a woman who didn't have a transactional element. Oh, you're not grounded enough. I'm out of there. Grounded enough for who? For me, right? She wants a grounded man. I'm not grounded enough to satisfy her demand for a grounded man, right? So off I go, right? Everyone has a certain use for one another. And if someone does nothing but make us miserable repeatedly and doesn't do anything to balance that out, we get rid of them, right? So that's human reality, particularly in a scarce environment where many of us are struggling to stay afloat. So my response is, let's have the contract be written clearly in the open. honestly, meaning let's not say I'll always be with you for all time and then I leave you because I found a better mother, right? Okay, if I'm going to leave you when I find a better mother, you're not a good enough mother for my 2-year-old, well, then fine. Just say, I will stay with you and I will give you a week's notice if I find a better mother, right? Because that's why I'm interested in you. You're a good mother, right? My 2-year-old can relax once in a while in your arms, and that's the only time he can ever do that because I'm not a good mother to him. So you'll be the mother to my 2-year-old. I will do this. I will buy this. I will do this and this. Is it a good contract? Meaning, does your life expand because of this? And does mine? Is it the best that we know how to create for one another? So what I'm not up for is lies. And what I'm not up for is getting in the way of someone else's happiness. Meaning, I have told my wife, if you ever meet a man that you think will make you happier, or if you want to make a man, if you're clear that I'm not, a good fit for you for some way, and you want to meet someone else, just tell me. I know some good men that would love to be in relationship with you, and I'll introduce you, and I'll keep an eye out for you, right? I'll find someone who is going to give you more than they take. That's a good contract. And you've got to be able to talk about the needs in that dynamic. So it sounds like Liz is going in the direction here of, I never want to use another human being for my need to manage my emotions. That's not, that's not the direction I would go. But I like, I like the honesty and the willingness to feel and be with the feelings, because if you're not willing to do it yourself, like I'm lonely, so I want to come over to your house. But if I'm lonely and I don't want to be in my house with me at all, ever, it's kind of saying this is a second-class job that I want nothing to do with, so you do it, and there's a derogatory message. I want to say, no, I can be with my loneliness, and I will. And I can be with your loneliness, and I will. And at this time, it would be nice to talk it through, right? This video is a connecting point, not ideal. It's a bizarre form of loneliness, right? Because, I don't have anyone to talk to at 1 a.m. in San Francisco about this. So I'm talking to a camera. That's loneliness. I would love to have, 10 people in the neighborhood who all say I'm lonely, 1. I don't want to be lonely. I'm willing to admit that I'm lonely and talk about it, and I'd love to talk anytime you want to talk about loneliness, because 77% of us are all lonely, regularly. And we'd like to do something about it rather than shame ourselves. So anytime, day or night, send out a text, and if I'm up, we'll have a nice chat with loneliness. I haven't met the American willing and able to do that. I'm sure they're out there. I just don't have the competency to find them. So I haven't, right? And so this is an alternative, meaning you're having thoughts and feelings, judgmental, praise, whatever, all about this. And I don't know anything about it because we're not connecting the loop. And if, with the most, with the YouTubers that have thousands of comments, they never reply to any of them for the most part. And so the circle doesn't get completed. And in a fame-based cult, often the people, like in my case, I have almost no views of these types of videos. And the idea is, well, that's not an important person because they're not famous. Or if they're famous, they're too busy to talk to you. So either way, there's no communication, right? So that's cult design, right? It's designed to block intimacy, right? When I have tons of time because I'm not famous, nobody wants to talk to me, because in a fame cult and a shame cult, you have to be famous to be worth talking to, but then, of course, someone with millions of people that want to talk with them, you have to wonder if it isn't part of the cult's design to make sure that the only people that people want to talk to are the people who have no time to be to be spoken with. And that all the people, your neighbors who are all watching famous people on TV and stuff, you could all be talking to each other, but they're not famous, so I don't want to talk to my neighbor. I'm worthless, my neighbor's worthless. So we aspire to say a few words to a famous person we can never get to know, and thus we can protect the cult's commitment to no one deeply knowing and being known by us. Where you used to be, there is a hole in the world, which I find myself constantly walking around in the daytime and falling into at night. I miss you like hell. This is definitely first of all, it's important to know what's being grieved and what goes on. When we form a rare, in our culture, deep committed relationship, we form a unique identity, a unique pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in that dynamic, meaning in the relay of energy, there is a unique identity that you only get to experience with that person. When that person dies, leaves, betrays you, whatever, you lose your relationship with that identity. There's a void. The one in you that you long to meet and engage with can't, because it only exists in the energy between you and that other person. You don't have anyone else to do that with. And you long more than anything to meet and stay connected with that part of yourself, and it dies off in a cult like ours. It leaves a void of everything that was most meaningful in life. The me that I liked to be with the most, which was in the dance with you, is dead. And in a psychologically and relationally illiterate cult, it's not going to be replaced ever the same way, and possibly ever. That's a pretty big thing to grieve. And you can stay busy, which is the cult's medicine. In a chauvinistic paradigm, everything masculine and thus outer is important. And so you have horrible feelings, you want to die. Well, who cares? You made $1 million that day. You cleaned the house and did everything on your checklist, right? So you stayed busy. So you could skirt around the ache in the day when you were busy. But when I'm just being, I long for the me I only knew with you. And I feel helpless because this cult is not going to respond to that longing. I can't put a post out on YouTube, on Facebook, and say, I long for this kind of conversation and that. I long with someone with the intelligence to listen in on this feeling, to hold me like this and not like that, to do this. Because in a shame-based cult, if you tell someone how to love you, in a chauvinistic, shame-based cult, their response is, nobody's going to tell me what to do, because to be told what to do, to be led, is to be put in a feminine position. The teacher is masculine, the student is feminine. The leader is masculine, the led is feminine. So if you say, I desperately need love, and I will show you how to love me, and I will teach you how to love me, and I want love like this, and I want to engage like this and like that, nobody wants to step into the feminine position because that's weak, that's less than, through the lens of a chauvinistic cult that only values half of the psyche. So she desperately longs for stuff, and there are plenty. She is surrounded by men who are lonely, who would be so lucky to talk with an emotionally illiterate, communicative person, but that would expect to fail. They very well might in a psychologically illiterate cult, because they don't have any practice, right? And they can't be told what to do because nobody's going to tell me what to do. Why? Because if you're told what to do, you're weak, you're a sheep, blah, blah, blah. And so you're trapped. You don't know what you're doing because your institutions don't teach you and in fact teach you the opposite. But to learn and admit that you don't know what you're doing is shameful, and so you can't do that because you can't handle any more shame after it's been laid on so thick since childhood. So you've completely walled the person in, and you have an inability to respond to these very, very poignant and beautiful moments that a healthy cult could respond to. The trouble is not that I am single and likely to stay single, but that I am lonely and likely to stay lonely. And that's true. Absolutely, right? Because to be lonely is to disown, to shame, to believe things about oneself, and not to cherish oneself. If one cherishes oneself with another who is capable of cherishing us, there's no loneliness. If we cherish ourselves and engage richly in the areas that we want to connect with in ourselves, there's no loneliness. But whether we are with someone or not, particularly if we embody our shame and our fear and our chauvinism in our partner, we find someone that is a good model, a good cult model for shame and loneliness, well, we will be lonely, maybe more lonely than if we were actually alone. I much prefer to be alone than I prefer to live in the delusions of a partner who is trying to bury me under truths they don't want to look at. Because when a partner doesn't want to look at their own reality and their self and their truths, they don't want to look at the truths in their partner that correlate. If someone's trying to bury me and pretend that I don't exist, that I don't have a right to exist, and blah, 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 and I'm going along with that, that's far more lonely. It's far more self-abandoning than saying, hey, you clearly put me in priority number 4. I'm putting you in priority number 1. That's a 75% gap in prioritization. It's unbalanced. It's going to be imbalanced. I'm not going to change you, and so I'm leaving. Well, that works. Loneliness is the human condition. Cultivate it. The way it tunnels into you allows your soul room to grow. I would say that loneliness is and has been a big part of the human condition, in part because the ego identity is the separate identity. In other words, part of the function of humanity on the planet is to be a part of the ecology. We are inextricably connected to all things, but experience it as separate and thus look at with more objectivity. That's our function. That's our uniqueness in the planetary system. So that is conducive to separation. While we're in this body, in a cult paradigm, we think we're separate from all these different things. We feel like we're a separate particle. In fact, we are energy that is interconnected on just about every dimension to just about every other thing, across time, across space, across laws of physics. There is hardly any area that we are separate except our identity, our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. That's where we're separate. And it couldn't exist if we were aware of how all that energy is connected to all things. So we cloak ourselves in kind of a sack and then put in these little points of energy where a little bit of energy can come through the senses, and that's it. And then we relate to being inside that dark sack with a few peepholes out into the larger part of ourselves. And so that is, we are predisposed to feel separate and isolated because that's the purpose of, one part of the energy pattern viewing another part of the energy pattern. However, it is healable. There is an infinite number of layers of loneliness, and it is healable meaning we can make ourselves one and thus whole again by opening more of the sacs, at least opening some of our thoughts so that we're not, deluding ourselves. So cultivate it. The way it tunnels into you allows your soul room to grow. Never expect to outgrow loneliness. Never hope to find people who will understand you, someone to fill that space. An intelligent, sensitive person is the exception. In our cult, that's true. Sensitivity is shamed. Intelligence is measured by the efficiency with which time, money, and natural resources is transformed into sustainable well-being. And most of us are spending vast amounts of time, money, and energy making ourselves miserable by abiding the cult memes. We are choosing normalcy over happiness in 1,000 different ways. And so we don't have many intelligent. We don't even have people who know what intelligence is. People think that someone who can do calculus is highly intelligent. Then you watch them use that calculus to create a nuclear bomb or to rape some rainforest that destabilizes a tribe, and we think they're a genius. It's just because we don't understand what intelligence is. You can't have intelligence that doesn't correlate with well-being, because everyone wants to feel better, and nobody wants to feel worse. So if you use intelligence to feel worse, it was never intelligence in the first place. It was just pattern analyzing with a faulty model of reality. The very great exception. If you expect to find people who will understand you, you will grow murderous with disappointment. The best you'll ever do is to understand yourself. Know what it is that you want and not let the cattle stand in your way. Janet Fitch. So I think she's talking beautifully about the American cult, maybe the Western cult. But I don't think she's talking about the inevitability, meaning human beings are capable of 1,000 times less loneliness and 1,000 times more awareness of integration and integrity than we have today statistically. We are capable of that. I can see how it can be done. It just takes a willingness to transcend the cult. The cult is conducive to maximum loneliness. And so to the degree that we cling to the cult as our norm, as to what's familiar to our family, we will always be in this rate. And I relate to the murderous response. You will grow murderous with disappointment. In other words, to yearn for love and belonging, to need it as much as you need oxygen, and to realize that some fuckhead right next to you could actually show a little humility, ask what they could do, be willing to transcend the stupidity of their cult and not have a third broken marriage. But they really think, going against all of the data about all of the stupidity, producing all of the suffering for thousands of years, they really think that being normal, following the norms, staying with the familiar, with the family, they really think that that, after all the data to the contrary, is the best policy. And that anyone who would diverge from the norm is suspect. When the norm produces so much misery, well, it's murderous. Oh my God, because it's so much easier to do with 3 or 4 people than it is to do alone. It is so much easier. Meaning if you could find 3 or 4 idiots in your neighborhood to read a book about loneliness and just talk about it in the halting, shame-based way of the American cult, 50% of your loneliness might lift. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to have big breasts. You don't have to be young. You don't have to be white. You just have to be halfway intelligent. Intelligent enough to know that you're not intelligent. and intelligent enough to know that there's nothing shameful about that in a cult that manufactures massive amounts of misery, consuming more energy than any cult in human history per capita, right? America consumes 100 tons of waste per person. An American will leave 100 tons of waste in a landfill before death. They'll put 1,500 tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. And they have a 77% chance of being lonely, chronically miserable, emotionally and traumatically illiterate, abused and abusive, unsatisfied in their sex life and marriage, and told that if they just buy another Porsche or another house or whatever, that this is going to fix it this time. You know, we've only told that lie to 500 million people so far, but this time it's going to do it for you. Okay, I'll work harder at my job, says the loyal sheep, who won't be told that they're sheep, right? Why don't you do it like this and like this? No, I'm not a sheep. Yes, you are. You're a sheep that's so sheep-like, you won't even listen to somebody who knows more than you do in a given area. That's pretty sheep-like. I'm an American. I won't be told what to do, says a recognizable American, right? So it's murderous. And I've definitely felt this way at times when, you know, some woman says, please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Okay, fine. Can you do this? Will you read this? Can we talk about this? No. So you won't do any of the things that would possibly make us able to connect. Yeah, I won't do them. Okay, then I'm going to leave you. Oh, please don't leave me. You know, it's nuts. And it's really important to understand the traumatic history of this, because the reason people are so nuts is not because they're evil. There's nothing personal. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about them. In a parentally illiterate, in a traumatically illiterate, in a highly sociopathic capitalist cult where you are valued more for your money than your presence, and this is important to understand. If you're Warren Buffett with $50 billion and you're impatient and you don't have any contact with your feelings and you haven't learned to be a good parent and you're not up on psychology or empathy and you don't give good massages and you're not a good cook and you're not a good listener about deep feelings, everyone will go out of their way in a capitalist cult to, oh, Mr. Buffett, can we deal with this? Oh, anything you need, Mr. Buffett. And because presence doesn't matter. The feminine doesn't matter in a chauvinistic cult. Meanwhile, if you're a beggar on the street, you don't have any clothes, you don't have any job, you don't have any money, you don't have any education, but you have warmth, you have beauty, you have enthusiasm, you have presence, you can give the best massages imaginable. You're a great conversationalist. You're a good salesperson. You're this, the other. You have a beautiful symmetry in your face. It's beautiful eyes. People will walk by you as if you're absolutely worthless, even in India. Why? Why is it that the feminine aspect of human interaction is so invisible that it counts for nothing? That a dry skeleton of a billionaire would get 10 to 20 to 1,000 times more attention. Oh, please have you stay. No, don't worry about us. We'll stay in the other room. We'll do this. Why? Because you have money. You have no value because you have no money. You have lots of value because you have lots of money. It's nuts, but that's the cult we live in. And so if you want to matter in this cult, you don't become feminine and present. You become wealthy, so you can be measured on the Forbes 400 list. Now, how do you think the feminine side in me feels knowing that? How do you think she feels knowing that she's surrounded by morons who don't value her any more than they value their own feminine self, who are afraid of tears, who don't want depth of feelings? She feels alone, unwanted, unseen, misunderstood, the opposite of love. Love is the opposite of loneliness. Now, how can I demonstrate to her on the inside that I love her when I have to hide her in the back room to satisfy the stupidity of a chauvinistic cult? When I watch my income go down for being emotional, go down for telling emotional truths. I've watched it all my life. I make less money being empathic rather than sociopathic. Intense, vulnerable feelings are not welcome in America in the workplace. To be professional in the arbitrary definition of the American cult is to not take it personally, to not be personal, and to not share anything personal in a business context. In other words, if you would just not be a human being, if you would understand that your biggest liability is that you're a human being, and your biggest usefulness is that you will allow us to get something done faster, be masculine, then we'll pay you lots of money. And if not, if you're too dumb to understand that's the game, well, we won't pay you a dime. We'll find someone else who's willing to bury their feminine side. It's enraging, it's stupid, it's painful, and I'm a cult member, right? Every time I put her in the closet and say, if you'll just stay in there for a few hours while I sign this contract, I'll let you out later, right? I mean, what a horrific message to my feminine side. The same message I've been given by a horrific cult from just about every angle. So that's loneliness. That's a piece of it. And there's a lot to go into, but I like this format. And so if you like the format as well, let me know. But I think I feel less lonely. I feel more visible, more understood by me and by intelligent people, meaning an intelligent person is capable of understanding what I'm saying and having some empathy. A human being is capable of having some empathy. An intelligent person is able to track what I'm saying. I have some empathy for myself. I'm able to track what I'm saying. So I feel like I've been with myself in this period. But I do like the fact that unlike therapy, which I've done a lot of, the therapist's supposed greatest attribute is confidentiality. I won't tell anyone all of who you really are. When did that become the highest value in a cult? You'll pay me lots of money not to tell anyone. You'll have nothing to do with my life, and you won't tell anyone in my life who I really am. That's therapy? How does that integrate the cult? Why don't I pay you the same amount of money and you go around and tell all my friends exactly who I am so that they actually know me, right? That would be more integrative, more useful. So, thank you. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.